I want to welcome Larry Botchway, who is part of Poor Collective, which is a design practice here in London that was started in 2019, fresh out of graduate school. Larry finished the MA architecture program here at the RCA and then started his practice with a couple colleagues and old friends. And I first met Larry speaking on a panel at Greenwich a few years back. And I found this practice like really inspiring in many ways. One, just the kind of courage to just start a fresh thing that had new approaches, with no kind of guarantee of success or projects straight out of the box from school, just incredibly inspiring. And then I think the methods of working are a lot of what we've been talking about today, like really focusing on like disseminating engagement rather than end products. Really quite amazing, and working with, I think, mostly younger populations, children or teenagers. So really like changing the focus of like whose spaces are designed for and with, which is actually quite a paradigm shift a bit here. So I'm very, very happy to welcome Larry here today. And from here, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Brilliant. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is begin with more, so what we are, who we are, what we do, and that kind of thing. Then move into an activity. The activity is going to need you to, sort of begin as individuals, but then work together in groups. We're going to see how it goes. Never tried it before, thought about it this week, but I think it should be adjusted. And I think, and throughout the presentation, if you want to interrupt me, ask questions, feel free. I want it to be a discussion. So POUR is an acronym that stands for Power Out of Restriction. We are a socially minded organization that focuses on the development of communities through the elevation of young people. So this is our current team of 4. 3 of us graduated here at the RCA, and one is like a sort of childhood friend. He's an accountant who's also really important for the team. Our focus is communities and young people. So we're interested in finding ways of exercising design agency. So like thinking about who the designer is and how we can empower people to have more say in their built environments, particularly people who don't actually have the opportunity to have say. So we typically do that through the co-design process, which we can speak about a little bit more later. And our vision as an organization is a world where you see no limits. So it's once again a reflection on our own experiences, sort of growing up in sort of social housing, for example, and recognizing that the spaces, your environments grow and change around you, but you don't necessarily have the opportunity to inform it and be part of that decision-making process. So we're interested in finding those ways of exercising agency. Another thing we like to reflect on is demographics. So we are actually all architects, or 3 of us are architects, one's an accountant, but the experience is very similar. What you find is that the majority of architects are, only 14% of architects are Black and ethnic minority, or 2% of architects are Black in particular. So that makes me one of the 2%. We have 29% of architects are in the UK are assigned female at birth. So once again, there's we need to start thinking who are the designers and who are spaces for. And finally, 52% of architects have parents who are already professionals. So that's another thing that we're quite interested in reflecting against, because when you look at the demographic of London, where we do most of our work, it's completely different. We have 40% of Londoners are of Black ethnic and other ethnic minorities. 51% of Londoners are assigned female at birth, and 45% of Londoners are not professional. So looking at the actual sort of the industry versus the actual demographics we're aiming to serve, there is no matchup. So how can we actually find ways immediately to inform the built environment? So the way we do it is, like for most projects, we have several types of projects. We have design projects. We also have more like programmatic projects. But speaking more specifically about the design projects, what we usually do is begin with this process of consultation. The reason we do that is because we always want to understand the context we're designing within. Like, who is there, what are their perspectives, and how can we actually ensure that I guess they're like comfortable enough to be able to engage. So with that basis, we begin with this co-design process. So that's when we actually start to like work with everyone's knowledge, work with everyone's understanding, but then also inject our own expertise into the design process. And finally, we always aim for this sort of tangible output. Sometimes it's a bit of public realm, sometimes it's a building, sometimes it's a bit, sometimes it's strategy. It doesn't really matter. But the main thing is that there is this kind of tangible output that is a monument to the experience of the process. So I'm going to flick through two projects of two different scales. One's a small pavilion we did in 2020 or 2021. Then the second project is more of a strategic project, which did have some kind of physical output, but the overall process is leaking it, is informing the master plan in this particular area. So beginning with bringing home to the unknown, this was a project that we did in Beacon Street. So what we did in this particular, sorry, you know, I don't know how many of you are familiar with East London, but there's an estate called Beacon Tree, which is a sort of suburban estate, and which had its centenary just 2 years ago.
And it's huge.
It's absolutely enormous, right?
Yeah.
And it's like almost sprawling. And in this estate, there was a school called Maysbrook Park School, which is a sort of like they call them like centers. They're the schools that when you've sort of been kicked out of school, it's your second chance at education. So many of these young people are really marginalized, they lacked confidence, and what we were interested in finding out how we could sort of build up their confidence through design, but then also make them recognize that there's opportunities to inform spaces that they didn't know they had say over. So in this project, we began with this upskilling process. So as well as encouraging them to get to know, have finding opportunities to get to know them and like have sort of more general conversations like who are you, what are your interests. We then moved into a process of like upskilling, so teaching them really basic skills like how to draw a plan, or what even is a plan, like how what is architecture, what is design, and how can I get involved in that process. So once they had this basic like toolkit of skills, we began to work with them to think about how they can actually start to design the spaces that how they could begin to start designing their own spaces, right? So what kind of spaces do you feel comfortable within? At the beginning, like many of our projects, especially working with young people, they began sort of tentative, not interested in what we were doing. Then by the end, the majority of them were actually interested in pursuing careers in design. That's another one of the sort of beautiful things that happens when you're making people recognize that actually there's space for me in this content. So by the end of the process, we created this pavilion with them, and each of the specific bits of seating, for example, in the pavilion that were designed by them. So they were all sort of reflecting different places they felt comfortable within. One of my favorite examples was one of the young people, this guy over here, who said he likes to hang out in as the car park. And then when he said as the car park, everyone's like what the hell kind of thing. But then by the end, when he explained why the place was valid, it made me really question. Well, I guess it really demonstrated the value of those perspectives that you never really hear, right? The reason was that there was passive surveillance first, which is a security guard around the corner, but then there was also a relative level of freedom. There was also shelter. Near the, you always have these like trolley spots. They like to sit on the nearby the trolley. So there's some kind of strange seating that you can sit on, you can lean on, but it's not like prescribed seating. But then there's also what's it called, the form of shelter as well, so you can actually still stay there when it's raining. So there were key factors that they paid attention to that a typical designer may not have been able to pay attention to. So there are insights that we wouldn't have benefited from if we didn't have those discussions. Here are a few more images of the project. And here's another project. So this is Bexley Heath High Streets for All. So in this project, we were working with We Made That and a market operator for a slightly different separate part of the project. This funding came from the Mayor of London, and the idea was to test how young people were able to like better access the space in the town centre. But just to give you a bit more context, there's 4 schools immediately around, 5 schools immediately around the town centre, all of them using one main bus hub, right? So it's a really hardworking town centre, hardworking travel infrastructure. We also have young people who don't, an elderly population who use the town centre to hang out, but they quickly scurry away before about 3 o'clock because they know that the young people are coming. So there's a tension that exists. But then to further this tension, there was also a racial tension that existed as well. The elderly population were a white working class population. The younger sort of emerging population was 80% black population, with parents who were professionals that sort of made money and decided to set up on the outskirts of London. What we wanted to do was think about how we can actually develop a project that almost recognizes these 2 demographics and actually brings them together. So through this process, we began with the consultation process, as we always do, but then with this co-design process, it was actually intergenerational. So we were bringing this elderly demographic together with these young people who they often clash with, and bring them together to actually develop proposals. We did a sort of mapping exercise, which was quite interesting, because what we found was that the majority of the issues that they were all complaining about were exactly the same. So it was kind of interesting to watch them realize as well, but then also find solutions to respond to some of these issues. One particular approach we focused on was the fact that many of the young people weren't aware of the existing infrastructure that existed within this context. This is one test route, and we developed with them. But the issue was that as some of the schools are grammar schools, for example, and like Catholic schools, what you found was that many of the students were unable to. I mean, they were just like coming to the bus stop, going straight to school, hanging out in the town centre, then disappearing again. But they actually had no knowledge of what existed in the context. And also to add to this, there is no real youth infrastructure in Bexley Heath as well. So the town centre kind of was their only option. So what we identified was like finding a way of basically encouraging them to discover Bexley Heath, understand what kind of public infrastructure existed in the context, and find ways of making them accessible for everyone. We did this through a wayfinding, we did this through strategy, first of all, which was injected into a master plan, and it's something that's currently being tested. But then we also did this through physical intervention. So wayfinding flags that directed the young people to the various parks and key landmarks within Bexley Heath, but then also through these sort of small playful interventions that we developed with them as well, finding ways of sort of encouraging like play and activity throughout, and also wayfinding throughout the site. So here are a few images of the flags in action, and some of the bits of wayfinding infrastructure. So wayfinding was coded into all of the games, but then they also doubled up as seating and so on. So now it's the challenge time. But does anyone have any questions before we get into the activity? How long have we got?
Yeah, that's a question, Larry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I probably shouldn't be asking questions. But the co-design process, can you talk a little bit about the way you go about it? Been doing a little bit with a colleague in Greenwich, and interested in your.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's actually funny because every time someone asks me that question, I always wonder, because it's like how we try to tackle co-design is the same way we almost like design together, like in a normal collaborative practice, right? So like in any typical design studio, what you find, unless it's a sole practitioner, of course, what you find is that you're always taking on ideas from different participants. You're then later on in a building, for example, you have to collaborate with like the engineers, the civil blah blah blahs, right? There's like several people that are involved in the process. So what we try to do is work with people in that same way. But then, but the value, but the difference, I guess, is that typically when you're in a normal design sort of environment, what you find is that you're acknowledging every idea because you recognize it as valid, if that makes sense. So what we do is just recognize the validity of everyone's experience, because one of our major beliefs, and I think we said this at Greenwich, right, that everyone is an expert in their own experience. So what we do is like recognize the value of their expertise and make sure that they're able to comfortably bring their idea to the fore, if that makes sense. But sometimes, for example, the response isn't, for example, if you're speaking to someone who has no design expertise, and you tell them, and they tell you that I don't know, they feel unsafe somewhere, so they want more CCTV. It doesn't necessarily mean that they want more CCTV. It means that the CCTV is one thing that they've seen that they know works, kind of thing. So it's also like making the time and the space to actually have that discussion and really unpack what it is that's making them feel unsafe, so that you can respond accordingly, if that makes sense. So I think it's like recognizing the validity in their perspective, but then also giving it enough time to given enough time to actually unpack what they really mean, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thanks a lot. That was great. I wanted to ask about so when you enter projects as sort of consultants or initiatives or whatever, and then you have to leave it at some point. And then especially with like, say, very binary population groups who sort of had to have together for some years, there's always the question of what to do with them after we as interveners leave. Did you have people who were based in actually after that, or like how did you continue the project?
So this project in particular, and I guess it links to another side of what Paul do is like we also do programming as well. So it's not, so there is like a sort of explicit design output usually, but then there's also like we have like a traineeship program, for example, and other kind of such things. And I guess I should have mentioned that because there's also, I think programming is also a design tool in our opinions. Design isn't always, you don't always need to make something for it to design isn't always the response. There isn't always the response, if that makes sense. So what we do sometimes is, for example, in this context, there were several young people that were interested in developing business skills, for example. So we did as part of the local night market, we did a youth enterprise challenge, and we developed, they all developed products, we got them made, and they sold them on the night market. So there was like a sort of slightly different learning process that they benefited from. But then that's something that we packaged and provided to the council. So this is something that they're now finding new funding to make a consistent thing. Like it's going to happen for as long as they can do it for. So I think in some ways we've also tried to, like, usually in these projects there is like sometimes the immediate output, but sometimes it's also, I think, equally as important to think about how you operate around that space, and you know, so that you can kind of create a bit more of a legacy, I guess, to each of the projects. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I would have a direct follow-up question, but I don't want to stall the activity.
I'm sorry?
I would have a direct follow-up question, but I don't want to stall the activity there.
Oh yeah, you can ask you.
I think it's okay, and then there's one online.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you now because you seem like to have a lot of expertise in this. The things you mentioned, like the programming, the traineeships, like with the say participatory design projects I've been part of so far, like we all do the same stuff. So like we do like in the tendering process, we do the programming and planning for the next 5-10 years, we enter the council, we enter the businesses. And I now just wonder, is there, like there were points where market or like funding programs seem to have been quite oversaturated from these proposals. And like, what do you think about other forms, like completely other forms of maintaining these operations?
I don't totally understand your question.
So like when, in that project, when you said, you had these startups or like other stuff, and you gave that to people who would then continue with it. Obviously there are loads of other people in London who do the same thing, like people from your, people who work like your collective. And I just wondered, like all these funding programs are rather limited. And what do we do to not always have to rely on these very specific funding programs within which we can initiate that, like what are completely different proposals?
I think sometimes you can sort of generate revenue through the outputs of the project sometimes. Like I think with the Youth Enterprise Challenge, for example, it did need like injection funding to begin with, but actually the products that were developed were actually like sort of strong enough products designed by young people to sort of generate revenue like on their own kind of thing. I think in that case we decided to just give it back to the young people. They made the money kind of thing. But in like another iteration, it could have generated it could have been somewhat self-sustainable. I think so. I think some ways you can sort of find ways to generate revenue through the actual project and the proceeds of the project itself. Other times it's just finding alternative means, so partnering up with sort of large organizations or corporate bodies maybe as well. It just depends on, I think if you can't find funding, you just find funding somewhere else, if that makes sense.
Thanks.
No worries.
And then Vanessa has asked, she's interested to know if you found any differences between the way teenage girls and teenage boys experience the spaces.
Yeah, definitely. I think what we found was like what different young people were focused on. I think was often quite different. So one example was we're working in a school called Townley Girls School, which was also Bexley Heath, and on the route to the library, there's no lighting, or there's lighting, but it's very, very sporadic, right? So that was something that nobody like paid attention to, I guess. But then the young people the young boys, for example, who were in the same space were more focused on the were more focused on the what's the word? The presence of, for example, there was like several homeless people, for example, in that context, and that made them feel intimidated. So although they were using the same space, they actually paid attention to quite different things, and how they sort of responded to those things were, for example, some relied on the teachers, so they would only go when the teachers were there. Others were focused on like going in like larger groups, especially the boys' schools. They would like make sure that they only went to and fro from school in like larger groups, and that's how they felt comfortable. Then once again, if there's a large group of young boys walking anywhere, there's usually complaints. So then that actually had like a trickle down effect, because there was the elderly people felt like there was like they felt intimidated by them. So like it's kind of interesting to see how lighting, for example, the presence of like other people can have an impact on like there's like a sort of chain reaction. I think that was kind of interesting. But there's like several examples of like slightly different perspectives affecting slightly different demographics, but all ultimately connecting to one another. That's always interesting to find, I think. And also the output as well, like a lot of the interest on what kind of interventions we developed as well were also sometimes impacted by the different demographics we're working with as well, which is always interesting. Like, you know, when you're talking about any kind of youth space, like designers just randomly like mention like skate parks. They just randomly say, oh yeah, let's put a skate park there, that's going to do the job kind of thing. But then what we found was that none of the young girls, for example, were interested in skate parks, and actually none of the young like black boys were interested in skate parks either. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how like sort of cookie cutter responses that you see and hear everywhere are completely irrelevant to several different demographics, I think.
We do have one more question from Haifa, and then maybe let's do that activity.
Yeah, cool.
Larry, thank you very much. The projects are very interesting, and the last one particularly resonates with a project that I worked on in Herlen in the Netherlands. I was wondering, you mentioned that you're on sites, if I heard correctly, that there were schools, and I was wondering if you were connecting with the stakeholders or the actors that are there and kind of thinking of activities that can transcend the what you're, as I understand it, it's more like tactical urbanism, or in my language at least, or like these punctual projects that you're inserting in these spaces, whether it's through furniture that regenerates the space in a way or another. So I'm just wondering if you thought about how it can be also activated, not only for the youth, but for the other groups that are there, and maybe perhaps considering timelines to deal with the issues of safety and um, uh, uh, fear that can generate or that can be present in such sites.
Yeah, so let me know if I've answered the question correctly, but this project in particular was focused on like testing, like it was like a sort of prototype project, but it was also a strategic project. But the ultimate aim was that if the prototypes worked, and if the objectives were met, this would, for example, inject or identify key spaces for improvement more generally. So the park, for example, that we were directing the young people to has some kind of like it has like swings and stuff like that, but swings are for like children up to 12 or something, right? So it's not actually particularly useful for the people who we were invited to this space. They also had like this like bike park thing that they created that nobody seemed to know about. So that was actually something that interested some of them. But then it also has like a number of issues, and there's ways that it could be improved for those particular user groups that we were invited to this space. So the idea was that if there is interest in these spaces, then the council would have to find funding to improve these spaces. So to some extent, this project is only the beginning. It identifies key bits of infrastructure and thinks about like long term, like where does this funding need to be? What kind of improvements need to be done to make sure that it's a more useful bit of infrastructure, I guess. So does that answer your question? Like the idea is that although the project is like all of these projects, especially the longer, more strategic projects, are focused on like identifying like long term and more like holistic responses. So even the lighting thing I mentioned earlier was something that was highlighted and now brought to the council. So now once again, that's another improvement that needs to be made to that context. Does that answer your question? I might have also just
Yeah, more or less. But yeah, it's also maybe a suggestion to kind of maybe think of more than I don't know, it's perhaps beyond your scope, but to think more of a broader scope of stakeholders there. And I was wondering as well if there is collaboration perhaps with the city or with the local organizations that are present there and so forth as part of your process of generating these designs and these participatory approaches.
yeah we tried to identify, we did like stakeholder mapping, tried to identify key like stakeholders in every context, but then we also in this project was like with the council, and they were sort of supporting. We also had like a consortium of like local organizations who were also like reflecting on all of our ideas as well. So I think wherever possible, we always try to like sort of the more stakeholders you have, although it's actually annoying sometimes because there's more sort of chefs. But the other side is that you're able to get like more buy-in as well. So you can benefit from that as well. And we have in the past.
Yeah, thank you.
Works. Oh, sorry. Okay, I was about to get out. So activity time. Can we get into groups? Hey, let's see how this goes. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna flick through the entire activity, then we'll allocate time. We've already gone over time. How much time do we have left?
The next session starts at 3 o'clock.
Okay, we're good.
But we're gonna take some lunch.
Yeah. Don't worry, we've 1 hour. We've got 2 hours. You're good. You're good. Forget about your lunch. No, I'm only joking. So I'll flip through the activity, and we can allocate maybe 10 minutes at each section also. Then let's have a discussion at the end. So the idea is that you're gonna take on a persona. Each of you will select a different persona, all right? Then following, then you're gonna, like in your sort of newfound character, you're gonna suggest a change, improvement, or adjustment to this space. And that's as an individual.
Larry, could you close the window? There's a breakout room window. If you're able to close the window. A touch screen might make.
Is it touching?
Yeah, I think so.
So later. Then as a group, you're going to bring all of those ideas together. The output is your choice. It can be a diagram, it can be an illustration, it can be like a mind map, wherever you select. But the main thing is that you need to sort of bring your suggestions together into one collective idea for this one space. And then finally, we're gonna just describe and just have a discussion about like what kind of decisions, negotiations you had to make through this process, and then we can speak about co-design more generally, and I guess what you found, and maybe we can speak about your own experiences of co-design if you have experienced it at the end as well. How does that sound? Yeah, cool. So select a persona. I'll give it. Should we do like 5 minutes for the individual, then 10 minutes for the group discussion. I mean 10 minutes for the the group bit, and another 10 minutes of discussion. 25 minutes more. Yeah. You stand up as well. Did you produce anything? Any diagram drawing? Can we see?
Some notes.
Yeah.
Mostly ideas rather than.
Yeah. Okay. Let's hear them. So what kind of decisions did you make?
So we are we picked very quickly for each other, and so we're a geisha, a Catholic nun, a soldier, a police officer, a dentist, and an American football player. And we really embraced the persona for a few moments together, and just kind of like individually thought about what they would want for the space. We quickly reflected this, none of us really cared about children, even though we probably all might have children. And we found there was a lot of connectivity actually between the things that we said that we would like for the space individually, in particular, a safe space to spy on children, surveil the children, somewhere for quiet contemplation. I wanted lots of physical activity as a soldier, as did the American football player. However, that was maybe quite selfish as well, and you even expressed, do we even want it to be a playground anymore? Maybe it should be a training ground. Or does anyone else want to interject?
I can add quickly. So we did take a lot of text notes, and then because it was a playground, I think we all assumed that we just start from there. So then we started thinking, what could we do with the children? So we had the idea of surveillance. We had the idea of, do we keep the landscape, the foliage, or do we take it out? Then we had the idea of making connections, so transforming the window into a door and the stairs. Then some others said, no, we shouldn't keep the playground, we should remove it, or we don't want to be investing in tetanus shots, so just bring new equipment, new stuff, etc. So I think we got stuck in that space when we realized that we're thinking about the children, but we never asked the children themselves what they want. So we were all coming down from that.
We were all operating with a vision of what we thought the children needed.
Yeah.
And not,
Exactly.
there was actually no thought to the children at all, or what they might want. There were some nice moments, like the geisha needed to make an entrance, so the staircase really was a good moment. And the nun was kind of like, yeah, I want to enter the room as well.
Amazing.
Everyone was really well in character. Our cop was just like, I need to control the kids.
Our dentist was very much focused on the health of the children, so we're going to use apple trees.
And the football player is financing the project. And he's even so generous, he's not going to have New York's Giants branding on everything. And just powered by NFL when you come in. Yeah.
Quietly watched by a police officer with a camera on everything.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing. Can you get one online?
Can you see my screen properly?
Yeah.
Okay, so we just basically choose our personas. We have a post officer, a train conductor, farmer, cyclist, photographer, gardener, and construction. One by one, we started to highlight what we want in person, and then we try to make a connection between the characters. For example, for post officer, he or she needs a shelter for lunch breaks, etc. Construction, post office, gardener and farmer, all of them need seating, and also farmer and gardener might want to exhibit the herbs or plants with that seating, furnitures, etc. Photographer also needed a shelter, plus some supplies such as electrical and water supply. Water supplies is for gardener and farmer, and electrical supplies is also for photographer and the post officer at the same time, because they both need light and also to charge equipments. And at the end, we took a last look to the photograph to see what is missing. For example, there is no access to green edges, so that site needs a development. The ground is not properly made, so in case of rain, it can get muddy. So rethinking grading and access to green areas is an issue. That's all I can summarize, I think, fastly.
I think the group also wanted more playful structures, like adult play as well as children play, and wayfinding to the train station in case the train conductor doesn't know what they're doing, where they're going, sorry. And to use all the surfaces for art, the walls and the paths as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. We get maybe one more group, then we have a group discussion about the negotiations we had to make and so on.
We are a diverse group. I'm a lifeguard. I'm a retired painter.
I'm a struggling magician.
I'm a Catholic nun. Yes, so the slide and all of this furniture in the park looked a bit dangerous. And as a lifeguard, I thought we needed some perspective to watch out for accidents happening and for the children playing and maybe old people falling down.
Yeah, and then for me, I'm an elderly man, and I needed more. I wanted to spend time in this space, but there was no like stable structure for me to sit on or stable ground for me to walk on. That was one of my issues, but I wanted a like neighborly space to be a part of.
And yes, like you can probably tell what we're doing is when we started our group meeting, we actually thought we'd draw on our expertise of what we could add, first of all, to the space. The there's a magician, this idea of performance and an ability to have an audience sort of came through.
As a Catholic nun, well, I thought about the theme of friendship and kinship and gathering the local community. So that was the focus for her on that specific set.
As opposed to there was the idea of providing like easy access, because like the person wanted to just easily be able to walk down the street and just quickly post all the letters. So they picked up, yeah, easy access, like providing a specific path to direct people around the park.
And as a reporter, I wanted the park to attract a lot of activity to give it a good story. So what we did with all of this, like looking at it and inspired by other things in London, like during the World Wars, where they took out their railings and made it into stretchers and then actually put them back in as railings. We looked at the equipment and decided that kids can have fun anywhere, but it wasn't very helpful for the rest of us. So we thought we'd take the stuff, given that we doubt it's going to be a huge grant, do some upscaling, learn some skills, maybe some welding or something, to turn these into railings that might be dotted around, given places to pause and so on. And then from that, thinking about how much time people might like to spend in this space. So for some, it might be if we could get it more actively used by the community, by actually putting a commute through it, but then also giving a space where people are comfortable to wait and stay and they don't feel like they're lingering, but actually contemplating and watching, with some choice in between each of how you could maybe take a slightly longer walk, but not too long, so I don't know if you want to talk us through our manifesto.
This is the idea with the pathways and the railings that we would make from the slides and benches, sitting area where you can get the perspective with the elevated ground, and yes, these open areas of vegetation making it attractive for people. And it became this yin and yang design. It's very harmonious with all of our different personas.
We might need to show it to the.
I don't know, it's not exactly ideal tracing paper, but we have this second layer that you might be able to see the different speeds that people could take through this path now. So we're giving them slightly more control on how long they have to spend there.
We're actually twins with you as a village.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to mention that we've also had some themes of like verticality, surveillance coming more from a farming and gardening perspective. So if you want to share any ideas later, that verticality and surveillance things like kind of scary but interesting for us.
Amazing, thank you. So I guess what did you learn so from that experience of speaking to different people's perspectives and also trying to bring your own like voice forward, if that makes sense? Anyone? Yeah.
Well, I mean, for first, I mean, we're assuming a lot of stuff, right? We were stereotyping a lot. What a nun is, what a geisha is, etc. We do have our own modest knowledge of these things, but we don't really know who they are, or we don't even know. You know, we have an idea of a nun, but maybe a nun is not this much conservative. Maybe she's actually more progressive than most of us. But so it's interesting how we always put ourselves in these pretty made molds, kind of.
I think on that, we definitely did stereotype, but actually by pushing ourselves then into distinctly 6 or however many we are different perspectives, there were stereotypes within them, but it did actually force a diversity of ideas. We recently had like a talk, a guy from Thames 21, who had said that they do a species council, where they ask people to like embody a butterfly and an eel, which is entirely guesswork, right? No one is on anything. But the advantage of actually then having a specific person looking outside their own thoughts, just for them, is maybe to be encouraged.
Yeah, 100%.
I was very positively surprised in our group that I found that none of us were actually stereotyping space. as it, I think most of us encountered some people in meetings who would see this space and they're like, oh, this is art disgraced by the council and the rights bit like that. And I was the only one in our group actually who said that it's all the council's fault, they should look cleaner and my children should not play in such a dirty space. Like we managed to actually circumvent all the usual tropes, which I really enjoyed. It was cool.
Yes.
I have a beautiful example, a beautiful role. Describe it real quick.
I'm a fish and chip shop owner, trying to embody the Englishness within me, and I mean seriously, one of the concerns I have in the process is everybody talks from their individual perspective, and however much I encouraged my friend, the pilot, or our 5-year-old child in the neighborhood to think about other people. Everyone's like, I'm the pilot. This is what I want, and I'm the fish and chip shop owner. And then the other thing was because I previously trained in art as a fish and chip shop owner. I was holding the pencil, and the person holding the pencil is king. Now it's like sort of suddenly the fish and chip shop kiosk is right in the middle of our poster. And you have this sort of you have this kind of power, which is quite significant if you're holding the pen.
100%. And I think that sort of really sums up the aim of this challenge today, because there's two things, right? There's the fact that not everyone has the opportunity to have their say. So how can we challenge that? Like how can we find ways to make sure that more voices are formally tied into the design process? One way is co-design, but the other side is also kind of recognizing that, yeah, we were embodying different personas, right? But we aren't those personas. So if we recognize that there's so many different, like diverse perspectives, so many different voices that aren't involved kind of thing, and we can't really get into their minds, we can make general assumptions, but we can't truly be them. How do we actually find ways to make sure that they're actually formally tied into it? I think it's just important to, sorry, you're about to say something.
Yeah, just when you said that, it really brought something to mind. I realised that the space in which we held the conversation really affected the result. So I personally have a weird distrust of circles. Like I feel they're like enforced kind of like equalised democracy, and I feel like actually, yeah, maybe it made me want to think about what you're just saying is like how could the space of the room or the space of the exchanges affect the conversation a bit.
100%. That's actually anyway. You're gonna get started. But there's we like in terms of the actual engagement process as well. There's one thing that I've been quite interested in recently. This is sorry, I won't go on for too long. But but it's also like where you engage. Sorry, we were having like quite an interesting discussion about a project in Hackney, which where we were trying to speak to people who worked in the offices at night. So, and what was one of their perspectives was that there's only like fast food available, for example, during the evenings, and so that means they would either prepare lunch or have to eat unhealthily and that kind of thing. But that perspective was only accessible by having like evening presence. But then there's also like a kind of discussion about safety as well, because if there's a bunch of like guys standing on the street asking you to come speak to them at night time, like how comfortable they feel with that experience as well. But there is something in finding like sort of different ways to access people where they feel comfortable where they are, like making the extra effort, because not everyone has the time to I don't know, come to your workshop that you presented at like 2 o'clock when everyone else is at work, or assuming that everyone works a 9 to 5 and that kind of thing. So anyway, there's something in there. Anyone else? Any other thoughts maybe online before we close?
Is that the first time you run that?
Yeah,
exercise.
Yeah. It was super curious. I had no idea how I was going to go, but like, I'm pretty happy actually. You guys. So thank you actually. All right, then I guess we can call it a close. Then thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.